How much boost can you run on a junkyard big block? Let's run a little boneyard boost.
In this video, we took a junkyard 454. We put it up on the dyno and ran it fuel injected and basically stock trim. Then we ran a carburetor and a camshaft. Then we ran it with a Vortech supercharger. But wait, we weren't done. After that, we installed an intercooler. That's right, we've got all of that. Fuel injected, carbureted with a camshaft, with a Vortech supercharger, and with an intercooler. So let's get going. Okay guys, before we get to the results, I want to point out something very important. This Gen 6 454 that we got from the junkyard, we made a few modifications to. First thing we did was change the ring gap because we knew we were going to run boost. Also, one of the most common comments I get when we run these tests is, hey, this thing was rated at 290 horsepower in this case, and you guys made more than that. What's the deal? Are those happy dynos? Not really. The difference is the way that we test versus the way that the factory tests. Now, when the factory rates a motor, they rate it the way that it comes in the car. They don't rate it at the wheels, they rate it at the flywheel, but when they test it, everything that they run on that motor is the way that it is in the car, meaning full accessories, complete air intake, any air silencer, air box filter, all that stuff, and complete exhaust, meaning stock exhaust manifolds, full exhaust, including cats, and everything the way that it is in the car. They also test at temperature, which is about 195 degrees, and they also test with the factory tune, which we know is very conservative, especially on a truck application, because they know guys are going to put 87 octane in that thing, lug them down, run them with trailers, so they have to be conservative on the tune. Now we're not. We optimize the tune. We run it colder than 195 degrees. We run it with no accessories, just an electric water pump. And normally we run it with headers and an open exhaust. Sometimes we run mufflers, but it's a short exhaust, no cats obviously. So we always make more power than the motor's rated at the factory. But that's not to worry. All we're looking at is we have a starting point, and then when we make a change, here's what we gain. So in this case, in this video, we took our junkyard 454 from the wrecking yard, added ring gap to it, but then we ran it with the factory fuel injection. As a matter of fact, we ran it with the factory fuel injection before we even did the ring gap change, because we didn't do the ring gap change until we decided to put the Vortech supercharger on. So we ran the motor stock with open exhaust, electric water pump, and an optimized tune. Then we swapped the fuel injection out for carbureted intake, put a distributor on it. Then we ran it with the Vortech supercharger at a really high boost. Then we added an air-to-water intercooler because we were running very high boost. Let's check out the results and find out what happened.
To get things started, we put our 454 Gen 6 motor up on the dyno. Now we ran this particular combination fuel injected with the factory long runner intake and factory injectors. We did put long tube headers on it, and as I mentioned, we ran it with the Mazira electric water pump and no air in it, any of that stuff. So run in this manner, our used junkyard 454 produced 356 horsepower. And you can see these things were built for torque in the truck, full-size truck applications, and 485 foot-pounds of torque. So the first thing that we did was take the fuel injection off because we weren't going to run the motor with the blower and fuel injection, although we could. We just obviously would have to step up with the fuel injectors and stuff. But what we did was we decided to run it carbureted because we figured more big block guys are running it carbureted than they would with the factory fuel injection. So we installed a dual plane RPM air gap intake, a 750 Holley, and we also upgraded the camshaft from the factory EFI camshaft to a comp Extreme Energy. Actually, this one was an Extreme Marine. It was a 284 HR, which was 547 lift, a 232-36 degree duration split, and 112 degree lobe separation angle. And we didn't choose that camper for two reasons, actually. Well, we choose it just because we had it there at the dyno, and also because it fit with the available piston to valve clearance, because that's the big thing with these big block Chevys. They've got very tiny valve reliefs, and they have limited piston to valve clearance, so there's a limit to how big you can go with the camshaft, and this one fit, so we wanted to run something that was easy We also upgraded the valve springs on the factory heads to a set of 26120 beehive springs, and those work well for our combination. So equipped with the camshaft, valve springs, and carburetor and dual plane intake, our combination, our 454, produced 427 horsepower, although peak torque was down just a little bit to 476 foot-pounds of torque. But it shows you what's possible with like a simple upgrade. So if you were to go get a used junkyard 454 from the wrecking yard, and put a simple dual plane intake and a mild cam, a carburetor and distributor on it, it's actually a 4 1/4 horse motor. I mean, it works really good. And it made 475 foot-pounds of torque, so that's working out real well. Now let's find out what happened after we installed our Vortech supercharger. Things are about to get serious. After running our combination with the fuel injection and switching over to the carburation, we decided it was time to run a supercharger on our big block Chevy. But before we did that, we actually increased the ring gap on it. It's very important before you install boost on a junkyard motor. A lot of times with these junkyard motors, because they have high mileage on them, the ring gap will have already increased, and you can run them with no changes. But the problem is, if you don't check it, you don't know whether or not that's true. Just because a motor has 100,000 miles on it or even 200,000 miles, you still don't know what that ring gap is. Not only do we probably not know what the factory ring gap was when all this started, we really don't know what the wear characteristics are. Some have a lot of wear, some have very little, and we've checked a ton of them. So I like to take them apart, check them, make sure I have a ring gap. If you want to know how much we run between 6.5 and 7 thousandths ring gap per inch of bore. So that's a really good guideline for high boost stuff like we ended up running. So we ran our combination, our carbureted combination, that produced 427 horsepower and 476 foot-pounds of torque. Then we installed our Vortech supercharger. In this case, we installed a Vortech YSI supercharger, which is capable of supporting over 1,200 horsepower, so it was more than enough for our combination. Now we ran this with no intercooler, just as a blow-through carbureted application. We also replaced the Holley 750 carburetor with a CSU dedicated blow-through 850 carburetor. We like that blow-through stuff. Kevin does a good job over there. It has boost reference power valves, and they're adjustable, so basically you can tailor when this boost reference, when the added enrichment from that circuit comes on. So with the combination of the jetting and that, you can actually tailor adjust the power curve so that it provides the right amount of fuel through the whole thing. So here's what happened after we installed our Vortech supercharger with no intercooler, just as a blow-through carburetor. The power output jumped to near 790 horsepower, and peak torque was at 713 foot-pounds of torque. Now this was at a peak boost level of over 19 pounds, which is pretty high for this combination. Lucky for us, and this was non-intercooled, remember, lucky for us, the blow-through carburetor actually provides charge cooling, because when you blow through the carburetor, you lower the charge temperature, so it acts as an intercooler. But it's no substitution, or it doesn't benefit as much as having the blow-through carburetor and an intercooler, which we're going to take a look at in just a second. On this combination, we ran dedicated pulleys on this, and it was a cog drive, so we didn't have to worry about belt slippage. On the cog drive, we ran, I'm going to give you the tooth count so you can multiply that out. We ran an 80 tooth crank, big crank pulley, and a 32 tooth blower pulley. We were nowhere near the maximum RPM limit of the YSI supercharger, because as I said, this thing will support over 1,200 horsepower. Now that we've run our combination boosted, and it made a ton of power, again, our junkyard motor, which is pretty cool, let's take a look and see what happened after we installed our air-to-water intercooler on our carbureted, supercharged junkyard big block. We've run our motor naturally aspirated with EFI, and then with the carburetor, and then with the Vortech. Now let's take a look and see what happened after we added our air-to-water intercooler. The air-to-water intercooler was an inexpensive one from CX Racing, but yet it's big enough to be run with even 1,000 horsepower stuff, so it works pretty well. So this was our NA with the carbureted deal. Here's what happened after we added our Vortech supercharger with no intercooler. $790 horsepower or so. Now let's take a look and see what happened after we ran our air-to-water intercooler. And the air-to-water intercooler was actually run with dyno water, which is about 81 or 82 degrees. So we'll take a look at that. You can see the power output jumped quite a bit with the intercooler. Definitely like having a cooler charge temperature. It was 847 horsepower, pretty big jump, and it picked up power basically everywhere. I'll go ahead and put up the charge temperature numbers here. We could, or not the charge temperature, but the change in boost pressure. We could see, if we take a look here, stay with me for a second here. Here's the boost on the non-intercooled version. You see we were pretty high. This thing made 19.1 PSI non-intercooled with just blowing through the carburetor. And here's the drop in boost after we installed the intercooler. So 17.7 pounds versus 19.1. Now the boost dropped for two reasons. One, obviously a little bit more restriction because we increased the length of the inlet induction system, and also because the change in charge temperature. Adding the intercooler dropped the charge temperature by over 100 degrees before the carburetor, and we didn't take a reading after the carburetor, but we had a drop of 100 degrees, and it picked up quite a bit of power, as you can see. So even if you're doing a blow-through application, an intercooler, whether it's an air-to-air or an air-to-water, always a good idea. So, Junkyard, boost, always good. Even on a 454. Let's get to our conclusion.
Okay guys, what did you think about our Vortech supercharged and intercooler 454 from the Junkyard? It works out pretty well. These motors will take a lot of power. In fact, we're going to follow this up with part 2 with a cylinder head upgrade where we replaced the factory iron heads with a set of Vortech aluminum heads. Aluminum heads, much better than iron heads. And as we'll see, even though we went down in compression quite a bit because the chamber on the Vortech head was a lot bigger, we went up in power and down in boost, which is awesome. So we'll get to that in the next video. But this goes to show you, and we've done other tests with these Junkyard 454s and made a lot more power. There's a ton of power waiting in these things with no changes at all, other than changing the ring gap. So if you want to add boost to something and you like big blocks, go get a Gen 6 454, install a cam in it, and then as we'll see, a good set of heads, and then add boost. You can make a ton of power. And all that factory stuff, the factory rods, the factory crank, and the factory pistons will all hold up if you increase the ring gap. I'm Richard Holdner, guys. Thanks for watching. I got a lot more big block stuff coming up. I got small block stuff, Gen 6, Gen 7, Gen 8, Gen 9, Gen 10. Actually, I'm even thinking about doing an 8.1 test. So let me know if you guys want to see that. Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.